Hello, insatiable listeners. Thank you for making season 7 one of our most engaging and downloaded seasons yet. The show is growing very organically because of your great reviews and word of mouth. No GMOs and glyphosate needed. Thank you. I will return on June 5th with our next season, season number 8, and a bigly announcement. Seriously, this is big. In the meantime, enjoy these previous Insatiable episodes. You know how each episode is jam-packed, so being in a different place with your health journey, you'll hear new things and deepen your ahas. Also, remember, we have transcripts of all of these episodes that you can find at allyshapiro.com/podcast. In the meantime, if you haven't left a review yet, please do. It's one of the biggest ways the show grows because it helps more people find the show. And it's super easy to leave a review. Here's how you do it. On your iOS mobile device, so either your Apple phone or your Apple Podcast, launch Apple's podcast app. Tap the search tab in the lower right corner of the screen, and then you'll enter the name of the podcast you want to rate or review, in this case, Insatiable. Tap the blue search key at the bottom right or tap the podcast name in the drop-down list. Then you tap the album art for the podcast. You tap the reviews tab. Then tap write a review at the bottom of the screen. If you're not already signed into iTunes, you'll be asked to enter your iTunes password to log in. Then, if you just want to leave a star review, tap how many stars to leave a rating. And if you want to add some written thoughts and share your voice, enter a review title, text, and content to leave a review. And then you tap send. And lastly, feel great about having contributed to the success of the Insatiable podcast. And here's some great reviews we've gotten from other people in our community. Christy Conrad writes, Allie digs very deep. This is a super helpful podcast for women to understand why they react the way they do or think the way they do. Outstanding stuff. Thank you, Christy. KDVSJV 2017 writes, honest, informative, and refreshing. She says, I found this podcast looking for something with Jolene Hart, who was interviewed for the podcast on her Eat Pretty series. Yes, Jolene is one of my really close friends. And she says, and I haven't stopped listening since. I live in a small town where people aren't quite as educated on health and wellness, although we are moving to Philly soon. So this podcast enough has been a sign for me. And listening to an episode makes me feel like I'm sitting down having an intellectual conversation with friends. I'm very much a find the root problem kind of person and always have been. And listening to this podcast has even opened up some truths for me about myself. This is truly the only podcast of its kind that I've found that's easy to follow, and I've been searching for something like this for a while. Definitely the kind where you find yourself listening to one episode 6 or 7 times just because you want to soak in all the insight and information. Thank you so much, KDV SJV 2017. And I hope you're enjoying your move to Philly, and you're going to find there's a lot of people there who don't know much about health and wellness, as well as where I live in Pittsburgh or even New York City. It's amazing what people don't know and what they do, right? We all have different ideas. But it can be helpful when there's a larger mass of people who think like you. And another review from Curly Girl 3, everything I've been looking for. I've either been dieting or hating myself for my whole life. There was no in between, either white knuckling around food or thinking I'm the worst person on the planet until now. Thank you, Allie, for connecting the dots for me. I've always known that I wasn't fat because of the food, but I didn't know what to do past that knowledge. But now I have some tools in my tool belt that help me process my stress and anxiety without binging. I feel so powerful and will always be grateful to you. This podcast is a lifesaver. Well, thanks, Curly Girl 3, for listening and running with the information. I love when people take action. And lastly, before I head out and let you listen to these other episodes, don't forget about our Insatiable membership community. This is a super innovative community, just like our conversations. Not only are you going to have amazing people who want to talk about the kind of stuff that we talk about on the podcast and even go deeper and are taking action around it, and getting support. But we also have a once a month mastermind. So, for example, in March, our theme was physical hunger. And I presented about 5 questions, and then each person reflected. And then we were broken out into groups. This is all virtual, where people could learn from each other and try to troubleshoot or go deeper with their own hunger. And it's been so great because it sparked all these conversations in our really easy to use online platform where people are finding ways to simplify their food so they actually eat before they get too hungry. Some people are uncovering a lot of the food rules they were living by they didn't realize. And there's just so much more that comes out of these masterminds. And then also once a month, there's a Q&A call with me. So you can come to the call and bring any questions no matter where you are on your journey. This last week, we had an Insatiable membership community member ask about, she wanted to hear more about food as attachment because it came up, another member had been talking about it in relation to their child. And so we had this great conversation about how food serves as attachment for us and what that means in terms of attachment theory and how we eat, whether we're eating in private or we're only giving ourselves a certain amount of food to eat, or we restrict or whatnot, what that says about how we feel safe and how food is actually, that pattern makes us feel grounded and rooted, even if it's uncomfortable. So we had a great deep dive on the psychology of that. And again, I just can't say enough about the other community members who are so wise, kind, and curious. And we're just having such great conversations and results. Here's what some of our community members have had to say about it. SI said, I got more out of one Insatiable call than my mindful eating app. Lori Horowitz said, the Insatiable community has helped me to not use food to comfort myself during a time of intense stress. And Linda Gilbert, who you've heard on the podcast before, said, the November mastermind on holiday eating was incredible. I uncovered something about myself that I didn't know was buried in there, and it totally changed my approach to the holidays. They ended up so much more meaningful as I felt deeper connection to loved ones after removing what had been a barrier that I created in my head. So again, it's just such a good time in there. I hope you'll come check us out. There's monthly and yearly options, and you can find details at alishapiro.com/IC2019. And again, we'll be back with season 8 on June 5th. Oh, and this season, you are just going to love it. And I can't wait to share my other big surprise. I wonder if you know what it is. Stay tuned. When you're fed up with fighting food and your body, join us here. I'm Ali Shapiro, creator of the Truce with Food program and your host for Insatiable, where we explore the hidden aspects of fighting our food, our weight, and our bodies, and dive deep into nutrition science and true whole health. Fair warning, this is not your parents' health care. This is a big rebel yell to those who crave meaning, hunger for truth, and whose lust for life is truly insatiable. Believe me, freedom awaits. Welcome to Season 4, Episode 5 of Insatiable, How to Have a Healthy Relationship with Your Body with Lianne Raymond. Today's episode is a trip, and I mean that in the best kind of way. You know, sometimes I can geek out on philosophy and spirituality, and Lianne comes to this concept of the feminine and having a body and emotions from a very poetic, mythic place. And this kind of is countering my more scientific angle on things. Not that they're mutually exclusive, but we speak in different languages. So we had a really interesting conversation where we explore and debate, what if we're not wrong for eating all the chips or cookies we want for a month? And I thought this was really interesting. And I hope you guys be really curious to see what you think about what we came to, the conclusions that we came to, or what we discussed. We're also going to talk about how thinking about your relationship to your body can get in the way of actually being in relationship with your body. In other words, if you're trying to think about your body parts and think about your stomach and this or that and loving it, you're actually not embodying it. So we get into the nuances of that. And then we talk about how fat is related to intuitive knowing and power. And I really loved this reframe as well as a ton of the other things that we talked about. So this episode can definitely get a little heady, but hang with it because it's really good and just let it marinate. Oh my God, these food puns are everywhere, but let it marinate. That was what I'm taking away from this as someone who tends to be impatient and just wants the answer. So a little bit more about Lianne. She is a personal coach and educator who specializes in developmental psychology. She has a master's degree in leadership and counseling and has been a student in the lineage of Marion Woodman for over a decade. So for those of you in the psychology field, we're talking depth psychology, right? What's the symbolism of our body, of fat, etc. She also brings depth and insight into a fiercely feminine approach to personal growth. You are going to love what you learn about the egg in the symbolic egg versus sperm story. It's going to blow your mind. All right. So enjoy today's episode. Lianne, thank you so much for being here. I am so excited to introduce the Insatiable community to you because you just have such a wealth of knowledge and you come at the relationship to our body, the feminine, in such a deep way that I think we're hungry for. Excuse the pun, the food pun.
Thank you for having me, Allie. I'm really glad to be here, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you just more than anything at all.
Yeah, well, and that's what this will be, is a lively chat. So the theme of season 4 is clarifying the issue so that we can move forward in a more powerful way. And one of the things that I think is so rich about your work is really defining the feminine in a way as relates to body image so that we can have a better relationship with our bodies, because right now the bar is pretty low. And so I want our conversation to be around that. But let's first start with your own journey with your relationship with your body, because I think I'd love to know how that informed your perspective.
That's a great question. How did it inform my perspective? So, I mean, I grew up in North America like any other woman of my age. So I'm 50, going to be 52. So, you know, I grew up with all the body obsession that our culture foists upon us, you know, really paying so much attention to every little part of my body when I was a teenager, you know, my thighs, my, you know, every discrete thing. And so I grew up with that the same way everyone did. I think I went to Weight Watchers when I was 12.
I was 11. I'm surprised we didn't see each other.
And it was like my mother brought me and my stepmother brought me. And, you know, I was all for it because I had this misguided notion that I needed it. But, you know, looking back, obviously, as I'm sure you also look back and go like, that was ridiculous. There was no need for that. But so just really immersed in that whole culture of obsession of, you know, appearance. But at the same time, I was always also a very outdoorsy person. I lived on the edge of the town, Saskatoon, where I grew up. I lived on the edge of Saskatoon, and I spent hours and hours just wandering the fields. And like I would lay down in the tall grass where you can completely disappear. And that was one of my actual favorite things to do. So there was this two things happening, right? There was this attention to what the world was asking me to be, but I wasn't abandoning my connection to Mother Earth, you might say. So I think those two things allowed me to both be aware of what the culture was asking of me when I did grow in awareness, when I, you know, went to university and got aware of feminist thought and allowed me to see that through my experience with that connection to the earth, with that deep connection to nature. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but.
Well, what I think you're saying is it helped you not stray as far as you could have.
Yeah.
From the source, from the mother that accepts us as we are and we are, right? We are part of nature. So to maintain that connection, I think helps us come back more easily. It's almost like attachment theory, right? Like
it absolutely is. And for me, so my mother died when I was really young and I grew up with a stepmother. So for me, I actually used to feel that. I used to feel that when I I didn't have the concept of Mother Earth so much. I don't even know if that was something I was aware of when I was growing up, but I knew when I went and laid on the earth and disappeared into the grasses where, nobody could see you and whatever, that I often had, what we might call mystical experiences, or just a overwhelming sense of oneness. And again, I didn't have this language, but in my imagination, this was my mother. This was my mother who, I could feel her presence around me. And so in a very literal way, it felt to me like being in the arms of my mother. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's so beautiful, because I think we can all imagine being in nature some of those times where I feel like that's where I'm most likely to get into flow, is when you're just like hiking, or you're just like, I sound so hippie. We have this park like next to us, and I'll be walking, and we just got this dog a couple months ago named Coffee, and Coffee will be running, and I'm like, Carlos, look at this. This is amazing. The sky. Look at Coffee, so happy. I'm so happy. And I feel like I need like Kumbaya to be playing in the background or something.
Well, it's so interesting that we have to put those little disclaimers in, that somehow if we're that crazy about nature, that we have to kind of say, oh, well, we have to make sure that we're not, we're still going to be taken seriously. And yet if we were to be like saying something about a dress that we saw at the store, it's like, oh my God, it was so beautiful. I tried it on and I felt amazing. And we wouldn't feel the need to put all these disclaimers around it. Like, oh, I know I'm overreacting, or I'm,
That's so true. Yeah.
That should be how we all feel when we go outside and we like see the amazingness of it all.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think what happens then is when we're not in our bodies and we're kind of monitoring ourselves, because whether it's about our body or thinking about all the doubts or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we start to, I think, well, let's first define the feminine, how you're, and it's because it gets thrown around now, like in so many different terms and so many different ways. And I would love to hear your perspective on how you define it, so that we can start to understand embodiment, having a relationship with our body, etc.
Yeah. So, I mean, the thing that I see the most often out there, and I don't know if this is what you're seeing too, is this invocation of the feminine in many spaces, the divine feminine, the sacred feminine. But what I see over and over again is it translates to buy yourself flowers, take a bath, put on a pretty dress,
go to a moon circle.
Go to a moon circle. Yes, exactly. So, I have nothing against any of those things, but it's just, I think it's limiting, and we've limited to the idea, the kind of Western idea of femininity, right? That the feminine equals this Western idea of femininity.
And that it can be commodified.
Yes, absolutely. So there's a couple of things that I love talking about that have informed this concept of the feminine that is so important to me. And I hope that other people find it valuable too. Because the other thing is this very dualistic thing, right? Where the feminine is the opposite of the masculine, right? That the feminine is this counter to the masculine, like the yin yang idea. I was in that camp for a while, but I'm so over that. And I am now in this space where the feminine is the principle of wholeness. So it contains it all. The feminine contains it all. The masculine is a tiny expression of the feminine.
Is that why, like, it comes out that people get so scared when women get power? Even though the feminine isn't associated with women per se, but the qualities of, anytime the qualities of the feminine become expressed, it's like a threat, because it is everything.
Yes, right. It is. So here's a couple of things that I sometimes tell my clients that help them wrap their head around this, that I think are powerful. So, and when I talk about the feminine, I'm talking about, and I'm sure, I'll say it's sort of a shorthand for the feminine principle. And you can whatever. And there's the masculine principle, the feminine principle. But The egg and the sperm. We all know that. We've all been taught that in like sometime in our schooling, probably, about how a baby is made and all that kind of stuff, right? And the image that we get is like this scrappy little sperm is swimming hard up the canal to find the egg and penetrate the egg and get stuff happening. But in fact, if you actually go and study embryology, what you find out is that the egg is highly active. The egg has much more going on than the sperm does. The egg is actually one of the only, is it the only? It is, I think it's the only cell that's visible to the human eye. All other cells you have to see through a microscope. So it's huge. It's comparatively this huge thing. And all kinds of stuff is happening inside of it. And so it's released from the fallopian tube, it travels down, right? And when these sperms start swimming toward it, and a sperm has very little activity going on. It has one thing happening. It has that, let's swim, let's move.
I don't want to stereotype. That's how my husband is. He's like, I can do one thing at a time.
Right. And let's be clear, we're not talking about men. Masculine does not equal men. So
yeah.
Right.
But it is kind of funny when you
it is, sure, absolutely. And so the sperm go and they hit the periphery of the egg. And what the egg does is it kind of measures each sperm that comes up, takes in a ton of information from that sperm and decides which one it's going to allow in. So it's not that the sperm is the sort of activator here. The feminine principle, if we say the egg represents the feminine principle, is much more active. It's seeing the whole thing. It's taking it all in, and it takes in the sperm, right? It takes it in. It's not that the sperm breaks through. It's that the egg takes it in. And so I think that's kind of that sort of sense that the masculine principle is an activating principle. It's something the feminine chooses to let it support what it wants to bring into the world. So in each of us, we have those two energies, right? The masculine energy and the feminine energy. The feminine energy is the principle of the wholeness, and then we bring forth our masculine energy to serve that wholeness.
Oh my God, I love that. I'm thinking of all the no pun intended, downstream implications of that. First of all, it values discernment. Right. Which I think is something that we've as a culture have lost. Like we have such that binary thinking and eliminates context and all this stuff.
Yes, exactly.
Which is what the egg is doing. It, like you said, it's taking it all in. And then I'm thinking about too, because if it's wholeness, and I'm thinking about so many of my clients' food stuff is really about lack of fulfillment in other places because they're trying to almost act first from this masculine place, or even if we respond to stress or however, instead of sort of thinking that's where the power is versus it's kind of stepping back and choosing and knowing you have choices and discernment, which I'm biased towards because that's what the whole process that I take people through is about.
Oh, I see. Good. Yeah.
But I love that reframe of it's taking it in. It's choosing what to take in. It's like you can choose when to say yes, when to say no, which is very, when I think about bodies and food, we're being, it's thrust upon us what is good or what is bad, and what is beautiful and what isn't, what's healthy, what's not, versus saying this is actually what works for me. I see so many, like my mind.
Yeah, I know. It's like, it's a game changer, right? To stop that. And this is really that little way we've been seeing that the sperm penetrates the egg, and sort of like, that is really our whole dysfunctional masculine leading our culture, right? Which is that the feminine is to serve the needs of the masculine, that the feminine is that the masculine is run rampant over the feminine energy, right? And the feminine energy being wholeness, being context, being relatedness, all those things you mentioned. And so, when we're in that space that you're talking about, whether we're dieting or whatever it is, usually it's our masculine, it's our inner masculine energy wanting to dominate the feminine energy.
Wow. I can totally see that. Like that makes so much sense.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense to me anyway.
Yeah.
It's,
Well, I'm thinking about one of the questions that, you let me look around some of your work. And one of the questions that I thought was so powerful is like, what if you relied on self-trust instead of disciplining yourself?
mm-hmm.
And I think you phrased it something, maybe probably better than that. But I was thinking in the relation to dieting, if people think like, what if you just trust yourself to know when to
Mm-hmm.
move, when to eat vegetables versus this someone else has to give me a plan. And I was like, I think at the most people, not people who have gone through my work or have worked with
Yeah.
other people or your work, but in the beginning, that would be terrifying. That idea of trusting our wholeness
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
over
Yeah.
disciplining. And because all dieting is restriction and disciplining and
Yeah.
beating back every natural impulse. Like you should
Yeah.
not be hungry.
Mm-hmm.
And I think of hunger as one of the most metaphorically like vulnerable things. We need to eat. We need to open to the outside world to eat. There's also, part of why we have so much stomach acid is because there can be bacteria and parasites on food, right? Like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
eating is vulnerable on multiple levels. And so then to trust yourself can be very vulnerable because it doesn't mean it's, I don't know. I'm
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think that's so, yeah. And so the way that this dysfunctional masculine shows up in our world is in the paradigm we live in that we don't even know we're living in, which is behaviorism. We live in a world that is all about behavior. And all we do is we want to regulate behavior, whether it's in school, whether it's parenting, whether it's food, whether it's relationships. You have all of this emphasis on behavior, and behavior, every time we focus on behavior, we are losing connection to relationship. Does that make sense?
Well, the way that I would interpret it is that when like the behavior is almost like the symptom versus of what's coming from how we're relating to ourselves.
Yeah.
Is that making sense?
Yeah. Well, so when we focus on behavior, so let's say, like I was a teacher for many, many years, and most of the training that teachers get is about focusing on behavior. How do you manage children? How do you, and when you do that, you lose insight. So it drove me crazy, right? Because you would see a child, who's here's an example. I had a boy one time, and I taught high school. I taught grade 11 and 12. So these are not young children. So I had a young boy, but a young man almost in one of my classes whose mother had died like a couple of years previous. And he, never really had room to deal with it. So he comes in and he's just really upset, and he starts like throwing a desk around. And now the behavior what I saw was, I was like, oh, thank goodness. I said to myself, thank goodness he finally feels safe enough. He's finally got a place in his life where he feels safe enough to express what's been buried in him for so long. Now, if I hadn't been, on the journey that I was to learn what I'd learned, and had been just a typical teacher who had learned what your teachers learn, I would have wanted to, send him to the office, discipline him for his behavior, make sure there were consequences, etc. Right? Instead, I said to him, I can't even remember what I said, but as soon as he could tell that I could see him, I said something like, "Oh, honey, it's so hard, isn't it?" And the tears started flowing. I didn't give a damn about the desk that he kind of knocked over because he didn't hurt anybody. And the tears started flowing, and it was like, this boy just shifted, and he became a different kid in my class from then on. Now, that's what I mean. If you focus on behavior, you lose insight, you lose relationship. It was the relationship that I had cultivated with him that finally made him feel safe enough to open the dam, right? This is the same thing with our relationship with ourselves. If I had been constantly nagging at him for every little thing he had done in that class, he would have never felt safe.
in my work, we look at, overeating, self-sabotage, all is self-protection. And it's not necessarily about that moment that you're sitting down to eat, or maybe it is about the tension in the room, but it's about the context within your bigger life that this is happening. And what I've seen happen is almost the obstacle in the path is that this protective side of ourselves that is trying to see if we're going to have choice and options. And we eat when we feel like we don't have those. But that protective side makes everything about us, right? You in a bad way. Like, this is happening because I'm a bad teacher. This is happening.
I see. Yes. Right.
Like I'm training my clients, like it's my fault that I can't stick with this. It's this. And so rather than understanding our behavior, it's like, this is who I am. I don't have discipline. I don't have willpower. And it's like, no, like most of my clients are like, have thousands of balls in the air.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so you just don't have discipline in this like one area? But I think that's sometimes the obstacle is the very wound that has created this protective side that is lashing out is also the side that feels like shame and afraid to explore that in a way.
Yeah. So I don't know, like I kind of wish I knew more about how you worked with your people, because I don't want to go too far out here. But one of the things actually that I wish that I don't mind this idea of let's look at what the emotion is underneath our eating or things like that. That's fine. That's fine. But let's not leave it there. Let's take it a little bit further and let's say, how is this impulse to eat right now actually the healthiest response I could have? Right? Like, how could that boy's throwing of the desk actually be the healthiest response he could have?
The process that we take people through is so that they can have healthier responses than food. However, because what I show clients is they kind of have this emotional trigger, and then what happens is a stress response. It's a very protective emotion, right? They feel like it's emotion they need to protect themselves from.
Sure.
And then it's actually the framing of, and I use Thomas Kilmann's conflict model of, do I need to compete? Do I need to avoid? Or do I need to accommodate? And it's actually these framing, which puts me in an black and white, all or nothing, either or mental frame, that then I feel like I have no choices. And that tends to be. So, but we learn these patterns of competing, avoiding, and accommodating because they were protective at one point.
Sure. Yeah, that's some really good stuff. And I
love it.
I love to kind of even take us further than that to say that's important. That's really, let's kind of look at it through this scientific lens of stimulus response and stress response and coping mechanisms and all of these kind of ways that we've learned through psychology, because I love psychology. But then I want to bring us into almost a mythic place too. Like, what if we can even, so again, it's not an either or, it's a whole, right? It's like, if I want to see my Western doctor, but I also want to see my doctor of traditional Chinese medicine who gives me some acupuncture, and so I want to take it all in. I want to use it all. So what happens what if desire to eat is a desire to reconnect to the Mother Earth, right? When we're taking in food, we're taking in earth. We're taking in matter, mother. And what if this is actually a really, really good thing? Sometimes you can look at it this way, but maybe another time, try this on, right? Try on the idea that, oh, this is actually really good. I want to feel that connection to the Great Mother, and that I don't even have to analyze it. What if I get out of the analytical mode for a minute and say to myself, what's the poetry here? What's the greater myth that I'm living beyond this analytical, this analysis of my pathology around food? What if it's something actually really important? What if I'm actually doing healing of the planet? What if it's not a problem at all?
Yeah, I'll have to sit with that. I think, I think, I think like we talked about before we got on, you think I'm a little bit more scientific. You're a little bit more, mythical and poetic.
Right.
And so I would have to think about that. I think my initial reaction would be, but how is me overeating and over consuming helping the planet?
Right. So you're being very literal, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
You're like, if I consume all this food, isn't this a bad thing for the planet? And sure. That's what I'm sort of just inviting your listeners to maybe say. So do you know about Harlow's monkeys?
No.
So this is a sort of classic 1950s. He would never get away with doing this experiment these days. But Harlow brought monkeys into the lab, and he had the wire mother and the cloth mother. You remember that now?
Oh, okay. Now I do. But yeah.
That's
Okay.
ringing a bell? Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you think of Harlow's monkeys, right, the idea was that at that time, mother love was considered a dangerous thing, that people were being told, not to be too affectionate with their babies because it was harmful to them. They needed to toughen up and be independent. So let them cry and don't respond to them, basically. And Harlow was kind of curious about this whole thing so he brought monkeys into the lab, and he had one kind of mother, quote mother, that was made out of pure wire, but she had a bottle. She had the nutrition, she had the food. And then he made another, quote, mother that had no nutrition, no food, but was covered in soft, warm, fuzzy cloth. And the idea was that the only reason babies wanted their mothers, the only reason babies, had any attachment to mothers was because of the nutrition that mothers provided, right? That they fed them, therefore the food response. Well, of course, Harlow's experiment blew that out of the water, because what happened is the baby monkeys spent almost virtually all their time with the cloth mother, clinging to the cloth mother, seeking that warmth, seeking that comfort, and only went to the wire mother when absolutely necessary to receive the food. And so sometimes I think that's what we want to be. We're kind of stuck in that same place that those scientists were, that we're surprised by these results, that we're like, wow, crazy. They actually want something other than food. There's actually something bigger here that is really hard to explain in scientific terms, right? They go on and they, develop theories, etc. And we talk a lot about attachment. And attachment is just a scientific word for love. And, so it's not like nobody knew nobody experienced attachment before science could name it. Right?
Good point. Yeah.
So sometimes I think we're still in that space a little bit, where we are wanting to be very literal about our relationship with food. And because we've got this bit of an opening of the door of psychology in the last how many years, since Freud and so on, that we now have these ideas of coping mechanisms. And so we're good at seeing it from that kind of pathological angle, like what is dysfunctional about my eating. And I'm just saying, what if we could pull back a little bit into a bigger picture and say, what is functional about my eating? What is actually, if I'm a whole organism and I'm part of a larger wholeness, then isn't this response somehow an attempt by the larger whole to get something back that's missing?
Yeah, well, I would agree with you. Because ultimately what we're working on, I kind of joke, as the root chakra, is to get them back to feeling grounded and rooted.
Yes, but what if it's not just individual, right? What if it's not just what's happening to this individual?
But as
a whole, if we're part of this huge organism that is on this planet, that includes everything that's even not human, right? That includes trees. And, we wouldn't, as trees respond to climate change, as, we look at them as whole. But when humans, we tend to see ourselves as individuals.
That's for sure, especially in North America.
And so when we look at our eating, we tend to see it as this individual issue.
Oh, I think it's a collective issue. Okay, I'm not getting it. I'm really not getting it.
Sorry.
I love this. I'm trying to figure it out.
Maybe we're getting too philosophical, but just so if it's a collective issue, how do we, so if you see it as a collective issue, then what is the collective, how do we respond as a collective?
I think we have to get more rooted and back into our bodies.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But what if eating is a way of doing that?
Oh, I totally think it is in some ways, but not
Mm-hmm.
always.
Okay, so you asked me, if I, at the beginning of the call, you asked me, would I be okay with talking about my stuff? And we talked a little bit about it. But one of the greatest transformations for me about this has been really letting go of the idea that there would be anything wrong with me sitting and doing nothing but eating bags of chips and watching TV for like a month. Like literally nothing wrong with that. Once I move into that space of like, there's actually nothing there's nothing wrong with that. Now I know this sounds ludicrous. I know it might sound ludicrous, but once we get past that idea that we have to control ourselves or that we have to manage this, there's a whole freedom that opens up. So think of it, sometimes I think of it this way. If the feminine principle is this beautiful wild horse that you come across in a field, the last thing you want to do is strap a lasso around its neck, pull it in, throw a cart on its back and say, okay, now you got to get to work for me. Right?
Yeah.
Instead, you want to sit down and you kind of want to just watch it for a while. You want to kind of watch it watch you out of the corner of its eye. You might notice it comes closer and starts sniffing around you. And at some point, if you wait and are patient, that horse will get down on its front haunches and invite you up onto its back to carry you. But if you are determined to beat it into submission because it has a job to do for you, you will never have a relationship with that horse.
I would agree with that.
So are you looking at that horse and saying, what is taking you so fucking long to come over here and make friends with me? Are you wounded from your childhood? Are you trying to, are you avoiding me because there's some, you're not going to pathologize the horse. You're going to just be curious and you're going to be patient.
I mean, I think we're on the same page.
I'm sure we're on the same page.
Yeah. I think you're taking, I think what I'm realizing is I'm impatient and I wanted a process to figure out, to be curious, but that could help me have insights, more guaranteed insights. Cause I definitely have I don't want to say trust issues because I've healed a lot from that. Cause ultimately trusting life is trusting ourselves to be resilient. Right. But I think you're probably more patient than I am.
Well, that's just it. I would say give yourself years. Give yourself years to be curious about you, including your body, you as a embodied being, rather than being too determined to figure it all out and solve the problem. And I know that's probably the thing everybody hates to hear. It's like, are you kidding me? I want an answer and I want it now. And I want to solve this. And this has been a monkey on my back for forever. And I just want to be rid of it. So give me the answer.
Yeah, no, I always tell people it takes more time than you think. And yeah, I think we're totally saying the same thing, just have different entry points to it. Because when I say that I have a program, I'm not giving anyone any recommendations or anything. It's just a self-discovery process.
Yeah.
So, but it probably has more more methodical, like that, where my scientific side comes in.
Yeah. And I would say it's probably more active, and I'm inviting a little bit more self-discovery and room to let yourself be discovered.
Ooh, I love that.
Okay.
I'm actually at that. I feel very comfortable in my body. I've, solved my own food issues, but that's kind of, I'm coming up on 40 in October, and it doesn't feel like I guess it feels significant because culture tells you it's significant, but I'm kind of like, I'm in that space where I'm like trying to figure out what life is asking of me now. Like I'm no longer trying to say, here's my agenda
Mm.
for having children or not,
Yes.
for what to do with my business or not, where to live or not. I mean, we're in Pittsburgh for a while, but all of these kind of big questions that's my personal edge right now is like, when is the horse going to tell me to come over? And I'm just going to be open. So I am actually at that stage
Yeah.
in other areas because I'm not concerned about what I eat anymore or whatever. But
Sure.
it's playing out in a different area right now. So I get that. It's like, do we just sit there and wait? Like now I want to turn this into a session for myself.
Well,
no, I'm kidding, listeners. We'll get to some more bodies.
well, part of it is allowing yourself to do nothing. Yeah. Part of it is to be in process, right?
Yeah.
To realize that the body is actually not an object, it's a process. It is constantly in a state of becoming. It's a conception. From the moment that sperm was invited into that egg and conception begun, conception has never ended. You are constantly a conception. You are not a concept. Your body is not a finished concept. It is a process of ongoing conception.
That's so beautiful. It's like art, right? It's like a living art.
Yeah.
I love that word becoming. And so one of the things we had talked that we were going to chat about is sometimes if we think we have a relationship with our body, how that actually gets in the way of being in our body. Can you talk about that a little bit? I'm still like digesting and processing.
Yeah. Well, that's sort of that. No, that's, yeah. And I hope that this isn't going too, theoretical, because I want people to be able to actually be invited into a new space, So basically that, yes, when we're in relationship with our body, when we're in it, and so we have this way of talking in our culture, right? Of my relationship with money, my relationship with food, my relationship, and that's great. And it's helpful. But also, how often are you unaware of how often are you your body? How often are you, so you were talking earlier about being outdoors and hiking and just like, right? So how often are we moving without being aware of our body as something we're in relationship with, but we're actually are experiencing ourselves as our body. So so it's not like this separate thing, that's the mind body separation, right? When we think we have a relationship with our body, we're kind of in that Cartesian mind-body dualism, where if I'm thinking about my body and I'm thinking about the relationship with my body, now I am not being my body. And so that's sort of that same idea of like you are a conception, you are something that's constant. So we tend to have this very mechanistic way of seeing things in the West, in the way we think, which is there's two major things out there right now, right? One is our mind is kind of the thing in charge, and our mind is something that, so we talk about rewiring our brain, for example. You hear a lot of that out there, right? That we have to rewire something, which is, if you think about it, that's not an organism. That's not something we do to organisms. It's something that we do to machines, to computers, etc. And the other big paradigm that influences us is genes and DNA. And we have this idea that there's a program in us that kind of, runs us. And so then the body just becomes the creation of the mind or the creation of the DNA. And both of those are very mechanistic, and there's no soul there. There's no soul there. Where's the soul there? And we are organisms. We are not machines. We're not computer programs. We are organisms. You would no more try to make a plant grow by pulling on it. So we have to really sort of see ourselves and experience ourselves as much as we can, as much as we want to be conscious and aware, and all of those things are good. Ensure there's moments in your day where you almost not conscious of your, where your mind actually is subservient, if you might, put it that way. But where the mind is just part of the body, right?
I remember in grad school working on a paper and just like said, the mind in like the paper, and my professor was like, I have to define everything. You have to define the mind. No one's ever been able to locate it. It's a projection of our thoughts and the body. And like, she was just saying it in an offhanded, like, side note. And I was like,
Right.
mind blown. Like, oh my God, the mind is not. And I think what's interesting is I help my clients start to see that when they feel quote unquote fat, because of how we've been conditioned to make meaning from being fat, that isn't a feeling. It's actually when they're feeling vulnerable, is their body has not changed. It's actually something in their life is feeling very vulnerable to them. And because our culture has said being fat is being vulnerable, they've linked, or they've struggled specifically with that. That's the link. But I'm like, the body, and that's what I find so interesting about body image is like, you could feel one way, and then after you go out of a hike, you've got the same body, but if you're in your body, you feel alive. And like when I was talking about when I was hiking, and let me tell you, these are air quotes. It's a walk. It's not really like,
no, yeah.
But it's just like, I feel so alive, and, and coming back from that.
Yeah.
And so even if I felt tired or anything, everything feels different after being outside. Like the same stress looks different. And that, I think, is when we talk about the mind, it is this fluctuating, it's not just your thoughts or whatnot. It's all of it together. So
yeah.
I totally hear that. But do you think, I feel like for people listening, that like they want to experience that, but it's so hard for them to get out of their head and out of the constant, I should this, shouldn't that, must this,
Yeah. So start just, go lay on the earth somewhere. Just go and literally let your body have contact with the earth. Take a blanket if you want, put it down, but go to a park if you don't have a yard. Go to your backyard if you have a yard. Find a favorite tree, make friends with it, give it a name, visit it regularly. Don't worry about trying to make this happen. Just start like really connecting to letting your body be. It's, watch an animal, watch your pets, watch your dogs, watch your cats, watch how they just lay around. Right?
I know, we always say Coffee's living his best life with us. Like he runs to the park with his friends, and he just lies, and he's exhausted for 3 hours.
Yeah, exactly. And so just be. You have to keep in mind that most of human history, we did not have ways of seeing ourselves as objects. We didn't have mirrors. Mirrors are a relatively new thing. Most of the time when people say they feel fat, it's because they're in that objectification place, right? So mirrors have gone on the nth degree, because now not only do we always see ourselves in mirrors, but we're always taking selfies too, right? And we're making everybody else see, so there's this whole objectification thing that's happened. So just be the subject. Just go and lay on the earth. Just don't, I don't know if you heard about this book where this woman went like a year without looking in the mirror. She just got rid of all the mirrors in her life. It's really fascinating. And you have to think that, for most of human history, we were not analyzing ourselves through our reflection, right? We were not seeing ourselves. And what would it be like to go even a whole day without looking in a mirror? Because every time you look in a mirror, you become an object to yourself.
I'm going to try that, because we only have one mirror in the bathroom to like brush our teeth and stuff. But I want to try it to I'll wash my face,
Sure. Yeah, you can. You can do all those things without a mirror. If you've been camping, you can do all those things without a mirror.
I totally want to try that. And when you were saying before about just go sit on the earth, I seriously felt like tears well up. That is so, I think it's your presence. You clearly have embodied your work. But I think for people listening, it may feel really agitating the first 10, 20 minutes. But I think if you sit or lay or whatever you're doing, you'll start to taste that that flow, I guess, of
Yeah.
what people would call.
That's the equivalent of like just sitting in the grass waiting for the horse to come to you, right? And I give this to my clients all the time. It's the simplest task and the hardest one for them to do, which is this do nothing. And it doesn't even have to be laying on the grass. But one of my clients, after like months of hating this, but humoring me and doing it, she came to a call one day in tears and she said, I can't believe what just happened. And I said, what? What happened? She said, and she was like a marathoner. She was constantly like, her body was like on a mission. She said, I was out for a run this morning. And she said, every time I go out for runs, she says, mostly what would go through my head is, oh, you're not running fast enough. Or, oh, you're going to, like constant criticism, right? Constant, like little. And then that started lightening up. But this morning that she came to this call, she said, a voice came up in my head and said, I love you. And she said, I didn't ever think that was even possible. And I said, yeah, I mean, and we both just cried because it's so like, wow, that's the horse getting down on its haunches and saying, come, get up on my back. That's the kind of patience we have to have with this.
Well, because I feel like our cells have to, like, it takes a lot to feel safe to come out, right? Because we put all of these, to your point, trying to strap the thing on the horse's back. Like it takes a lot of time for our inner core soul, I guess you would call it, our soul, to feel like I can pop my head up here.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's Zora Neale Hurston who says like, yeah, it's love. Love makes the soul crawl out from its hiding place.
That's so beautiful. That's so like, oh my God, you would be in my hippy dippy. I'd see you in the park. Yeah. I'd be like, hey.
I know. And it sounds all hippy dippy, but it's so
hardcore.
It's so hardcore if you want. Yeah. It's so much the truth. Yes, you can like lose weight or get in shape or whatever the things are that you think you need to do. Most of us are doing them from a place of frustration or anger or conformity or disappointment, right? And we're telling our bodies, if you want to use that kind of Cartesian mind body, we're telling our bodies, you are a disappointment to me. And nobody's soul comes out in that atmosphere. Nobody's soul comes out when they feel like they've been, I mean, that's one of the most curl up in a ball and disappear kind of feelings, is when somebody gives you the impression that you've been a disappointment to them. So how do we maybe just make a little bit of room for us to say to ourselves, there is nothing you could do that would make me not love you.
It's really profound. I'm just taking it in. No, it's when you think about it in those terms, it's breathtaking.
Yeah. I mean, it was my dad's birthday a couple days ago, and he died 8 years ago. And I was talking about him once, and I said, my dad gave me the greatest gift any parent can give a child, but really the greatest gift anybody can give anybody. And I said, I always knew he was crazy about me. There wasn't one moment in my life where I didn't know he was crazy about me. Yeah, I never felt like a disappointment to him. So what if we could give that to ourselves?
I'm just thinking of like all the creative things that would come up. Like if we were just like everything that we thought we should be disappointed, we're like, oh, moving on. Or let me use that for compost, to use an earth metaphor. I feel like we would all just be like really joyful. And I mean, not that life is all puppies and rainbows, but there would be that deep belly laugh joy and more art and more music. And
we don't realize how, they say about fish don't even realize they're swimming in water. Like we don't even realize. When I was up north, I taught up north in Canada for many years, and there was this amazing woman up there. And there was a guy, and he said, she's the most sensual woman I've ever known. Now, if you were, and I understood what he meant, like the way she was what we would call an overweight woman, but she was this wise elder of this tribe. She was just so embodied that there was, every cell of her was alive and full of vitality. And you watched her eat food with just this absolute sensual enjoyment. You watched her move through the world with sensual enjoyment. Like every step she took was like, just sent joy through her. Like there was something. And I thought, I had my whole worldview like knocked right back, because this is not the stereotypical sensuality or beauty or whatever, but it was absolutely undeniable. And I was just like, wow. Suddenly I had a new way of thinking what could be possible without being some skinny, cover model or something. Like just to really be, and I was like, given the choice, I was like, I think I want to go more towards her now that I've seen what that looks like.
And probably what you felt, I've had a couple clients who have had, what we would say bigger yoga teachers. But the way that the yoga teacher moves and the way that she's embodied, they're like, her class, like they will not miss that. Like these are
exactly
with different teachers, but I do not miss that class because there's something the French would say, je ne sais quoi.
Exactly. and would you go up to a person like that and say like, everything about you, is so great. You're such a great teacher. Have you ever thought about losing about 20 pounds? Would you do that?
I mean, you definitely wouldn't do it, but you wouldn't even, I wouldn't even think about it. Like, because,
right.
I mean, I think it would be noticed, again, to your point about just noticing, because we don't think people who aren't a size 2 or 4 can't be happy with their bodies. Right. So,
right.
Like, wow, this person is so embodied. There is like,
yeah.
What are you reading, drinking,
Yes,
what park are you hiking in?
Yes. And if I had asked that woman, this beautiful sensual woman that I was describing, if I had gone up to her and said, could you tell me about your relationship with your body? She would have looked at me like I was like, like that would never have occurred to her. It was not part of her worldview. It was not part of how she just was. She just was who she was.
I have this book on my reading list about how language in general just kind of separated us from the feminine. I mean, I haven't read it, so that's just like a high level.
Is it The Alphabet Versus the Goddess?
I think so, yes. Have you read it?
I love that book.
Okay, now I'm going to put it up to number 1. Synchronicity. I do want to say, I wonder if you believe in that. But I was like, oh my God, what a concept. Like, we don't need language for everything. We don't.
Right.
That's okay.
Right. Well, yeah. And I mean, there's another book that I love that's kind of along the same lines, or you could just find his talks online. But Ian McGilchrist writes, he's a neuroscientist, and he writes about right brain, left brain stuff. And he talks about, he says it's really strange actually that we have these 2 brain things. But his book is called The Master and Its Emissary. The Master and His Emissary, or Its Emissary, I can't remember. But he talks about how the right brain is, like we've been talking about the feminine, the right brain is the whole. It sees everything. It's the left brain is meant to serve the right brain. The left brain is where language comes from. But what's happened is the left brain has gotten it has gotten out of its proper position, and it's taken over. And so it's another way of talking about feminine principle, masculine principle. So yes, absolutely.
Interesting. You had talked about body fat being related to intuition. We're
yes.
Talk about how we can explain without words, know without words, know. So can we, like, this is fascinating. I want to know what the link is.
Okay. So this is just so juicy to me. I hope other people find it juicy too. But I mean, the war on fat is the war on the feminine, right? the feminine is the embody, is our bodies, is our, and including our body fat. So there's this amazing guy out there, Gil Headley, and if you're a yoga teacher, you'll probably have heard of him. He does these amazing dissections for people who work in the world of body, but not traditional dissections where it's like, taking the body into all its discrete parts. He like takes the body in layers, and he wrote this amazing article, and I can send you a link to it and you can give it to your people. But he talks about how, and hey, have you heard about this new organ that they discovered?
Wait, is it like the fascia?
The interstitium, they're calling it. Yes. And it's with the fascia, and they could never see it because it's not something that it's a process. It's not a discrete organ that you can say, here it is, and see it on a dissection. So they were never aware of it because it's something that's organic that moves through the whole body, and they call it the interstitium. Well, this is, and it's in the fascia and in the body fat, that whole layer of amazing connective stuff that is through our whole body, right? Not a discrete organ. So Gil Headley, this amazing anatomist, he says that there's nerve innervations in our fat tissue when he takes the instead of seeing fat as something to get out of the way when he does dissections, let's get the fat out of the way so we can get to the real stuff. He actually takes the fat off as a whole layer, and he says it comes off as this amazing, beautiful golden fleece, he calls it.
Ooh.
And he says it's innervated with nerve endings and things, and he says this is the part of our body that feels things before our mind is even aware of them, right? This is where our intuition lives, is in this layer. And it's our body eventually, you know that feeling you feel someone's looking at you? Yeah. That is something that happens, and we turn around and we look at before the thought even enters our head that someone's looking at us, right? It's like this immediate response. So that's intuition. That's that deeper knowing that is beyond the thinking mind. That is our body having this visceral response. And that is, according to Gil, he believes it's really located. Like a lot of scientists would say that it doesn't even exist. But Gil is amazing, and he says it's in our fat tissue, that's where the intuition lives. And so if you have this idea that fat is something to eliminate, that fat is a problem, you're dismissing your intuition. You're saying, there's a place that, and of course the patriarchy wants you not to have intuition, right? Of course the system, the dysfunctional masculine system, wants you to get rid of other ways of knowing.
Oh my God. It's the same way, like here in Pittsburgh, our really prominent Pulitzer Prize winning cartoonist was just fired after 25 years he had really accurate cartoons about Trump and kneeling and, all this stuff. But I'm thinking about here in America, our assault on our free press is really like spiraling because you don't want people to have various ways of knowing. In fact, sorry, this is like, I love connecting these dots. And when you were talking about that, I was thinking so many of my clients, we were just in yesterday's Truth with Food. We always kick off with what's working, then like where people are struggling, and then, whatever.
Yeah.
But so many people were like, I cannot believe how adding fat in has changed my life. And we talk about that all the time here on the podcast, but until you actually do it and like get enough fat, and I'm thinking about, it's like, and then they're like, I'm starting to get more insights. It's like, oh my God, I'm starting to see.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. Oh, wow. I never would have. Yeah, that's amazing. I wouldn't have put that together, but that's cool.
Well, I'm thinking from like a physiology blood sugar standpoint.
Sure.
When your blood sugar is balanced, you feel calmer, more able to kind of take it all in versus, but you need fat. I mean, to balance your blood sugar, like you need enough fat. So there's a cool metaphor there. But I love that idea. And I'm especially thinking like, I guess when women are pregnant, I mean, are they more intuitive then? Or is that like a myth?
Well, I think women are more intuitive in general.
Oh yeah, I would agree. Yeah.
Yeah. And what if that is because we have this extra intuitive organ?
Yeah.
Right?
Oh
that
my,
that actually that we have been thinking has been a problem, that the dominant culture has been telling us we should be trying to get less of. And it, like, interesting, hey? I don't know. Yeah, but yeah, and I mean, pregnant women definitely have, there's something
yeah, because
that,
I'm just thinking I mean, they're producing a child. So,
yes,
but
yeah,
part of that is to gain weight. Like, so you can get
yes.
into it. Like, I mean, I don't know. I'm just,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
oh my
mm-hmm.
God, but I love that idea. I mean, like my big takeaways are like, I'm going to go sit in the grass, like in the park and do nothing. And I'm going to now think of my waist and my butt as like intuitive power
Yes,
muscles.
totally. And I mean, and Gil, this guy, this dissection guy I'm talking about, he one year decided to dig. It's like, he's just such a crazy but amazing guy, and he dug a hole in his backyard and then crawled into it naked and stayed there for like a few days because he just, that's how, like, if you really want to go wild, you can go even beyond laying on top of the earth, but at least give laying on top of the earth a try.
Yeah,
You
start
don't
there,
have to,
guys.
you don't have to dig the hole, but just, yeah, like,
Well, that's Carlos was laughing because when we got to visit my parents, my mom has an organic garden in her backyard. And she's like, I'm like, oh, she's like, come out and see it. And I was like, okay. I was like, I will earth, and I put it in quotes. And Carlos was like, yeah, when did it become a brand to just walk on the ground?
I know, right? I know, exactly. This is just our, our heritage. This is just what we've been born to do. And
Yeah.
we've just kind of got a bit disconnected from it. So it's actually not that big a deal.
Yeah. 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 It's our home. Like,
It's yeah,
so
totally.
this has been like, I'm going to go back and listen to this. And like, I just so appreciate this. I have one more question because you are so poetic. And I know it's like a non sequitur, but what do you think happens when we die? Like, you have such a strong philosophical,
Mm,
spiritual, like, you've clearly thought about this stuff. So,
right.
after my grandma died, I was asking like every person on the episode because I was going through,
Yeah.
she had believed in reincarnation. And was like, when she died, I was like, is that her? I mean, I had always believed in it, but I was kind of trying to figure out if that was really what I believe versus because she was so
Right.
instrumental in my life. And then I
Yeah.
realized because she, like the meritocracy myth of liberty and justice for all, there's not any in like on earth. And because she didn't believe that like Jesus was at the pearly gates deciding who to get in, she was
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
well, you'll just keep coming back. That's my version of like,
Right.
justice.
Yes. Yes. Right.
And so I've just like, I went on this big existential crisis and I'm still curious. So I would
Well,
love if you don't mind answering.
sure. And I'd love to hear what you think too. So I think that, I think a couple of things. I think that when we're stuck in the time framework, then we can't, it doesn't, that we think something has to happen. We think everything is a linear progression. And then, so in one way, I think sort of like, I think my dad is still present because time is kind of an illusion. So I still can have a connection with him in that way. I still feel connected to my dad, even though he's dead. I still feel connected to my mom, even though she's dead. Because in some way, they always exist. Maybe not with me right here in this time, but in essence, they still exist. And then I don't believe in reincarnation. It's never rung true for me, but I know I think it's too individual oriented that it's our ego that wants to think that we as this distinct entity either go somewhere or come back as something else, but that there's this part of us that remains. In that sense, I think that we're like waves in the ocean. So I think when you see a wave coming in, it's very distinct. And in that moment, you can say, look at that wave. But then that wave comes on the shore and the water goes back out. And everything that was that wave mingles with everything that also was another wave down there, whatever. And it all, so I think, so for example, like in the Jungian perspective, I think when people think they have past lives, and they, were something in a past life, that's them tapping into the collective of all the lives that have ever been lived, right? That's the ocean that we return to. So yeah, we can sometimes have that connection to another wave, but that doesn't necessarily mean we were that wave. And so I think there's just this sense of, I have in my own, experience, I have experienced, like I said, when I was younger, I'd have this mystical type experiences where there was just this clear understanding that of this clear feeling that everything is just one thing, that there is no separateness, that separateness is an illusion. So that's pretty much how I think of what happens when we die, is we return to the oneness. But while I'm here in this time, I also think that, like I said, I can still connect to my mother and my father in that essential sense, because they're part of the oneness too, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I remember my sister trying to explain the new findings in quantum physics, and I could not wrap my head around it. And she was like, basically, like, remember we used to open presents when we were little at Christmas time? Like, that's still happening, like way back.
Right.
And I'm
right.
like, oh my God, you're right. Like, she's like, that's basically what we have learned, that time doesn't exist. So it's like, that is still happening, even though we're here. Like,
yeah.
And I do agree with you too. It's like, I think about, like, sometimes when I think about my grandma, like, I know what she would say, or I know what she would her presence, how it would make me feel more secure, more love or whatnot.
Right.
So in a way, she's still here,
Yes.
but I've just arrived at, I don't know. And Carlos is, both agnostic, but we say it's like, I think a lot of people think being agnostic is like really close to atheist, and I'm not. It's not that. Like, I worked really hard to get to I don't know.
yeah.
But I feel more content with it, and I do think we are all connected. And I think of nature, but I just think whatever it is so. Like, every time I learn about, like, a new pocket of nature, my mind is blown. Like, the intricacies.
I know, it's amazing, right?
Yeah. So I'm like, my little human brain is never going to be able to conceptualize if there is a grand design, but I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to figure it out. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah. And it just it's great, because that I don't know place and it shows us the limits of our mind. Our mind can't grasp, like, why is there something rather than nothing?
Yeah.
Like, who knows?
Yeah. I am just committed to the mystery, because
that's how I talk about it too. I just call it the mystery. I just say, like, I'm absolutely devoted to the mystery.
Yeah. I sometimes, like, I don't wear pearls, so I clutch my chest, because I'm like, I don't want that to open up, like, really stuff that's bad that I can't explain. Well, I mean, I can't explain what's happening in our country, but, like, I don't want to, like, have that open up, because, the mystery isn't necessarily all romantic.
Right.
So,
yeah,
this has been so wonderful. Do you have any parting words? Or where can people find more of you? I mean, we will have this on the show notes, and you gave us so many cool things to try and reframes. I'm really jazzed, but where can people find more of you?
I'm not easily found.
Tell me about it. Like, I follow you on Instagram. Yeah, I know.
I'm actually I mean, this is not something I do very often, but I really enjoyed you, Ali. So I was happy to do it for you. Yeah. So I'm just at lianneraymond.com, but I'm sorry that we didn't get to a couple stories, actually.
Do you want to share one?
Well, there's one story I think is just one of my favorites, and do you know the book Eating by the Light of the Moon?
No. Is there another one I need to add to bump to the
I don't know. It's kind of in your wheelhouse, I think, of what you do. But anyway, she shares a story in it, and she has a specific purpose for the story, but I just think it's a great story. And she says it's an African folktale, but I went and did a bunch of research, and I couldn't find any reference to it anywhere as an African folktale. So I don't know if that was just trying to give it some pedigree that it doesn't have. But the story is that there's a girl, and I think this is a story just to be with, not to try and figure out, not to try and apply to your life, but just let yourself actually have this story as a little treasure in your pocket that you roll around in your fingers from time to time. So the story is that there's a village that is going through some really hard times. There's like food has become very scarce and the people are desperate. So they set out traps and they start to trap things like lizards and rats. And one day, and this young girl is one day, it's her turn to go check the traps. And she goes out to the traps and most of the traps are empty, but one trap has this beautiful bird in it. And this bird is singing the most beautiful song. And that's the only thing that's been trapped. She can't bear to bring this bird back to the village to have it be killed and become food. So she sets the bird free. So somebody in the village sees her do this. She thinks no one will find out, but they see her and they absolutely are furious with her. So they drag her out into the woods and they build this hut out of, the sticks of the forest, and no windows, completely closed off and they throw her in this hut and she can't get out. And she cries, just till there's no more tears to be shed. And then suddenly she's laying there in the bottom of the hut and she hears this bird singing at the top of she can hear this bird. And she looks up and there's a tiny, tiny hole at the top of the hut. And there's the bird singing to her and it drops a berry through the hole. And she picks up the berry and she eats it. The next day, the bird comes back and again sings. Every time the bird comes and perches on that hole and sings its song, its movement and its activity just make the hole get a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger. Every time that the hole gets a little bit bigger, more light is coming into the hut. And finally, at some point, the hole gets big enough for the girl to crawl right out of the hut. And all to celebrate her freedom. All the animals of the forest get together and there's a huge feast of berries and fruits and all the bounty of the forest. And the villagers are invited to come and everybody comes and feasts and the famine is over. And the villagers then say to the girl, "We're so sorry for what we've done to you. Come back to the village." And she says, "It's too late now. I'm going on my own way." She goes off onto the woods to forge her own path. That's the end of the story. We don't quite know what happens after that, but just take that story and maybe think about putting it in your pocket and letting it be a little bit of mythic nourishment when you're getting a little too literal.
You have a couple more of those vitamins.
Well, the other one I tell all the time is the simple Aesop's fable about the sun and the wind competing to get the man's coat off, if you know that one.
I read Aesop's fable when I was little, but we'll end with this. So tell us, do you mind?
No, that's fine.
But I love that other one too,
this one is like the core of what we've been talking about too.
Yeah.
By the way, I love that. I love the name of your podcast as Insatiable, because yes. What if insatiable is like, wow, powerful, not, I love that so much.
I think of it as like curiosity, like it's really at the core about insatiable curiosity. We just happen to talk about holistic health here, but to me, being healthy is being curious and not open, but was it Emily Dickinson who said ajar, right? So you have that discernment. Yes. You are the egg.
Yes, ajar, yes. So it's a simple fable. I'm sure you've probably heard it and you'll recognize it when I tell it, but there's this man walking down the road and he's got a big overcoat on and the wind is kind of bored that day, and he says to the sun, he's feeling kind of cocky, and he says to the sun, "See that man there? I could get his coat off." He says, "You think you're so powerful up there in the sky, but watch me, watch what I can do." So the sun goes, "Okay, go ahead," So the wind whips itself up into a frenzy. It goes as hard as it can at the man, blows really hard. The man, of course, in response to the wind, pulls his coat even tighter around him, right? He grabs each of the lapels and pulls it tighter, tightens the belt. The wind gets even more ferocious and the more the wind tries to pull the coat off, the tighter the man holds onto it. Finally, the wind says, "Okay, I got nothing left. I've given it my all. I guess I was wrong. I guess I can't get his coat off." And the sun says, "That's interesting. Well, I'm just going to stay up here and do what I always do. I'm just going to shine my warmth down onto the earth." And of course, as the sun just rises up in the sky and shines, the man just naturally, spontaneously, with no effort, just gets warm enough to take his coat off. And the sun goes, "Look at that wind. All I did was stay up here and provide warmth, provide that sun, that shine, that love, really, right? And the coat comes off spontaneously. And so often we're trying to be the wind when we just need to be that warmth.
That's so beautiful. I love that. I love that. Yeah. The sun is doing the sun, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's when we leave ourselves to just that place of non-forcing and trust and warmth and love, whatever's not necessary will fall away.
That's so beautiful. Thank you for being here, Lianne.
Thank you, Allie. This was fun.
I had a ball. I have so much like mental nourishment to like piece over. I'll be following up once I get some clarity.
Well, I hope it wasn't too confusing.
No. It's getting me to think about things in a different way, which I love. Right. So that's
okay.
I love it. I love it. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome. My delight.
Thank you, Health Rebels, for tuning in today. Have a reaction, question, or want the transcript from today's episode? Find me at AllieShapiro.com. I'd love if you leave a review on Apple Podcast and tell your friends and family about Insatiable. It helps us grow our community and share a new way of approaching health in our bodies. Thanks for engaging in a different kind of conversation. And remember, always, your body truths are unique, profound, real, and liberating.